It's a new round of China-U.S. strategic communication. Two senior diplomats, Wang Yi and Jake Sullivan, had met in Beijing.
中美关系攸关两年，牵动世界。过去几年，两国关系充满了波折。在习近平主席和拜登总统的战略引领下，我们实现了重返巴厘岛，通往旧金山。其中的经验值得总结，教训需要汲取。
Wang calls on the two sides to work with each other based on mutual respect and peaceful development. Sullivan says the two sides need to look for common ground.
We are working to ensure that competition does not veer into conflict and that we find ways to work together where our interests align. And all of that requires the kind of strategic and substantive and constructive dialogue that Director Wang was just referring to and to which we remain committed.
China says ties between Beijing and Washington are still at a critical juncture or being stabilized. Against this backdrop, the two sides are having an in-depth exchange of views on sensitive issues. The meeting took place just a few hours after Sullivan arrived in Beijing Tuesday afternoon. China calls Sullivan's visit an important step to implement the common understandings the two heads of state reached at their San Francisco meeting. And the two sides should abandon major country competition and pursue peaceful development. 赵云飞 CGTN 北京。
面对变幻交织的国际形势，各国需要团结协作，而不是分裂对抗。人民希望开放进步，而不是封闭倒退。中美作为两个大国，我们实际上都有这方面的意愿，就是对历史、对人民、对世界负责，成为世界和平的稳定源、共同发展的推进器。尽管中美两国各自情况和中美关系都发生了很大的变化，但是中方致力于中美关系稳定、健康、可持续发展的目标没有变。按照相互尊重、和平共处、合作共赢处理中美关系的原则没有变。坚定维护自身主权、安全、发展利益的立场没有变。争取中美人民传统友谊的努力没有变。希望美方同中方相向而行，以积极理性的态度看待中国和中国发展，视彼此的发展为机遇而不是挑战，同中方一道找到两个大国正确的相互之道。
Thank you for receiving us today, Mr. President, and I bring warm greetings from President Biden, who sends you his regards. Since the Woodside Summit, our two sides have made important progress on key areas of cooperation that you and the President discussed. The President sent me here for the first trip by a national security advisor in 8 years to follow up on this agenda and to maintain the high-level strategic communication that is essential for responsibly managing the relationship.
For the first time in 8 years, the U.S. president's point man on national security is in China. Joe Biden's national security advisor, Jake Sullivan, landed in Beijing on Tuesday for a 3-day visit, the fourth round in a series of strategic communication with China's top diplomat Wang Yi. Wang is also a member of the Political Bureau of the CPC Central Committee and Director of the Office of the Central Foreign Affairs Commission of China, and he's also the foreign minister. The visit is Sullivan's first visit to China in his current capacity. Hours after Sullivan touching down, the two sides went straight down to business, holding talks at a picturesque conference center north of the Chinese capital. Now, for China, high on the agenda are the issues of Taiwan, development rights, namely sanctions and tariffs, and China's strategic security. For the United States, these are fentanyl, military-to-military communication, AI, and geopolitics. So what does the visit tell us about the current state of China-U.S. relations? Is the world's most important bilateral relationship showing signs of stability? With the U.S. elections just months away, how useful will this mechanism be? Welcome to a special edition of The Point, an opinion show coming to you live from Beijing. I'm Li Xin. I'm pleased to be joined from Hong Kong by Kishore Mahbubani, Distinguished Fellow at the Asia Research Institute of the National University of Singapore. Kishore, welcome back, and it's always a pleasure to host you on the show. So first of all, given the important role of the National Security Advisor, how important is this visit? And we've seen that during the previous 3 rounds of this strategic communication, the location has moved kind of closer and closer to China. Why such an arrangement?
Well, Shin, thank you very much for having me on your show again. Paradoxically, this visit by Jake Sullivan to Beijing is both very important and very unimportant. Let me explain the paradox. It's important because any meeting between China and the United States, wherever it happens, whenever it happens, is good for the world. Because the whole world is deeply troubled by the relationship between the United States and China, by the deteriorating relationship between the two great powers, and it has tremendous ramifications for the rest of the world. So whenever the US and China meet face to face, the whole world applauds and says, thank you, please keep on talking. And in that sense, this visit is important. But paradoxically, it's also unimportant because President Joe Biden is effectively a lame duck president. Everybody knows that he's going to step down in January. Everybody knows that there'll be a new president in January. And so the capacity of President Joe Biden to make large, long-term decisions at this stage is very, very limited. But nonetheless, if, for example, the visit of Jake Sullivan to Beijing results in another face-to-face meeting between the presidents of US and China, we should also welcome it.
Well, Sullivan's visit, and this is a curiosity question for me personally, it's his first since taking office in 2021. Is it too late for a national security advisor? And for the past 8 years, definitely, there are no information indicating that he actually came to China, and he's, stipulating the most important relationship or the U.S. most important policy towards China. Is it too late for a national security advisor to finally be on the ground in Beijing and see and feel things for himself?
Well, I mean, since you point out the lack of visits, I was just told, I'm not sure whether it's true, that the first president since Jimmy Carter not to visit Beijing as president is probably President Joe Biden. I mean, in part, this is due to the fact of COVID. COVID, as you know, interrupted travels for 3 years, 2020, 2021, 2022. But nonetheless, that's a significant fact. And you're right to highlight the fact that it is very unusual for the National Security Advisor not to visit the most important country that the United States has to deal with, which is China. But what it reflects is something even more fundamental. It's a point I've been making in my book, like Has China Won? And it's a point that was given to me by Henry Kissinger, who, as you know, before he passed away, was the greatest living strategic thinker that the United States had. And when I last saw him in a one-to-one private and confidential conversation in October 2022, Henry Kissinger confirmed to me a key point of my book, Has China Won? That what the United States needs to develop is a comprehensive long-term strategy for managing the return of China as a great power. Now, we do know that the United States has a very negative attitude towards the return of China. That's very obvious. I mean, you don't have to be a rocket scientist to work that out. But at the same time, what are the goals that the United States is trying to achieve in the various actions it is taking against China? That's not clear at all. And here I speak actually as a friend of the United States, and here I advise the United States, why don't you work out a comprehensive long-term strategy that spells out what are your key goals? What do you want to achieve from this US-China relationship? And I think that exercise will lead to Americans, the more thoughtful Americans, realizing that at the end of the day, you have to live with China. And you have to live and cooperate with China, especially in a small interdependent world, which faces common global challenges like climate change, like pandemics, like mpox, like financial crisis. And so that's what the world would like to see, a clear, comprehensive, long-term strategy from the United States on managing China.
Do you think the United States or at least the Biden administration or the National Security Advisory Team is able to face up the reality that China is here to stay and China will continue to follow its path of development and be stronger? Because we are seeing from a briefing of a senior U.S. administration official right before Sullivan's visit that they're saying we are clear-eyed about the threat that the PRC proposes or poses to the international order, and we expect that to be the case for the foreseeable future. Our strategy is designed to meet that challenge. So they're using the word threat, on top of the word competition. Do you see that they really know what they're talking about? Do you think they are really looking for the right strategy? Because to see China as a threat, that's a wrong path to go down, in our eyes.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, it is quite natural now that the United States, as we know, has launched this geopolitical contest against China in an effort to thwart China's rise. It is natural for the United States, therefore, to try and demonize China. And so, and given the current strong anti-China mood in the American body politic, any American politician has to sound harsh and negative on China, because if any American politician today says anything remotely positive or reasonable for China, he or she will be committing political suicide. So I think from now till the elections in November, you have to assume that there will be consistent anti-China rhetoric. But it's very important for a great power like the United States to make a distinction between the rhetoric, which it has to say for public consumption, and then the private strategy that it has to employ in dealing with China. And it has to work out here a rational way of managing China. Now, I can tell you, for example, together with the former president of the current president of the King Abdullah University of Science and Technology, Tony Chan, and Ben Harburg, I co-authored an article in the magazine Foreign Policy saying that all the efforts by the United States to stop the technological development of China cannot succeed. It is impossible, right? China is investing more in science and technology than probably any other country except the United States of America. Chinese scientific competence is rising. So it's not rational, therefore, to try and stop China's development. So what the United States needs to do is to sit back and work out a rational course of action for dealing with China, because China is not going to go away. And equally importantly, China's links with most countries in the world today are becoming stronger than the links of the United States with most countries in the world, because China is a bigger trading partner of more countries in the world than the United States. So any effort by the United States to try and isolate or contain China cannot work. This is not the Soviet Union. So this is why the United States has got to sit back and work out what can work and what cannot work. And that's what, if this can lead to a more predictable, rational policy by the United States, the world would cheer the United States for doing that.
Do you think the United States is on the right path of understanding that? Because for China, it is a perception. It is the perception that is the problem. The United States sees China as competitor with a limited partnership, whereas China sees the United States as a partner, as a potential partner with some limited areas where the two sides compete. Is that the fundamental difference between the two sides? You think the two sides can meet each other midway somehow through these strategic communication?
Well, certainly, I believe that they can meet each other midway if they both try to rationally pursue their own national self-interest. And if the goal of China, for example, is to grow its economy and improve the living standards of its people, and if the goal of the United States government is to grow its economy and improve the living standards of its people, and frankly, it's much more important for the United States to focus on this now, because the United States is the only major developed country where the average living standards of the bottom 50% has stagnated for 3 decades. And it's shown in the fact that the United States is the only major developed country where life expectancy has come down. That's a sign of major domestic social problems. So it would be wiser for the United States to focus on improving the living standards of its people, and it can best do that by cooperating with China and the rest of the world to grow the global economy, rather than trying to stop China's economic growth and development. So I keep emphasizing one key point, that if the United States were to step back and work out what its long-term rational self-interests are, then the conclusion will be that while you may have to compete with China in some areas, you should also have a very strong cooperation program, which will actually benefit both countries.
We're going to leave it there. So many thanks to Kishore Mahbubani, Distinguished Fellow at the Asia Research Institute at the National University of Singapore, joining us from Hong Kong.
27号，中共中央政治局委员、中央外办主任王毅在北京会见由德国联邦议院社民党党团主席米策尼希率领的社民党代表团。王毅表示，今年是中德建立全方位战略伙伴关系10周年。习近平主席4月同舒尔茨总理举行会见，为两国关系发展把舵定向。中方愿与德方一道，加强党际交往，巩固战略互信，深化务实合作，推动中德、中欧关系行稳致远。米策尼希表示，德国高度重视对华关系，德社民党愿同中国共产党继续开展合作对话。